For weeks before everything changed, my mother took the tin of dinner rolls at the front door and did not ask me inside. I want to start there because that's the moment you need to understand before anything else makes sense. Not the childhood. Not the years before. Just a woman standing on her own mother's porch, holding a gift nobody wanted, while behind the glass door a table was being set for a family that no longer had a chair for her. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 34. And 3 days before that porch, my father called to tell me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Because of what I did for a living and who might see it. What none of them knew was this. The company my brother's new in-laws had just built their whole future around, the founder they'd been quietly admiring at their own dinner table for weeks, was me. And in 4 weeks, at a party with 80 guests watching, one calm question would take my family's careful picture apart in front of everyone. Let me take you back to where it started. I began on loading docks at 19. For AM starts, frost on the steel, pallets of produce heavier than I was. I went to community college at night, accounting classes with gas station coffee, and at 22 I bought my first refrigerated truck at auction with a dent in the door and financing I could barely carry. I called the company Dawson Cold Freight because it was the most honest name I could think of. We hauled food. We kept it cold. We showed up. 12 years later, we had 130 employees, 58 trucks, 2 warehouses outside Columbus. I signed the front of every paycheck. At my parents' table, I was still figuring things out. That was the family phrase for my entire adult life. My brother Andrew managed portfolios in a glass office downtown, and that got a toast every Sunday. I kept half the grocery stores in the county stocked, and that got a change of subject. My mother, Margaret, grew up poor and never forgave the house for it. Appearances were not a preference for her. They were survival. My father, Richard, measured people the way he'd spent 30 years measuring insurance claims, by the paperwork. A title meant something. Calluses did not. So I stopped correcting them. Somewhere around year 5, I stopped mentioning the company at all. I brought the side dishes. I fixed what needed fixing around the house. I let the word warehouse sit on me like a coat that didn't fit, because arguing with my mother about my own worth felt like a game she owned the referee for. Then Andrew met Nora Hayes, and my mother's idea of a good life grew a penthouse. Nora's family owned Foster Family Foods, 3 generations of preserves and jam, the kind of brand that sits behind glass at the nice grocery stores. Her father, George, ran the company. Her mother, Helen, ran everything else. When Andrew proposed, my mother cried for 2 days, and then she went to work, new linens, a rehearsed vocabulary, a version of herself built for the occasion. Nora, to her enormous credit, was lovely. Not polished lovely. Actually lovely. She asked what I did and then she listened to the answer, which by then was 1 sentence long, out of habit more than modesty. At the engagement dinner, my mother introduced me to a room full of strangers as between things right now. I own 2 warehouses and a fleet of trucks. Andrew got the full biography. At some point he made a joke about me driving the forklift if the band needed help, and the room laughed and I laughed too because that's the price of not making a scene. One thing happened that night I didn't think about again for weeks. George Hayes, sorry, George Foster, shook my hand on his way to the bar. He held it a beat longer than politeness required and glanced down at it. "Working hands," he said. "Don't lose those." Then he was gone, and I told my mother later that night that between things wasn't true and it had hurt. She was warm as bathwater. Of course, honey. Of course. I found out what of course meant 3 weeks later. Nora wanted both families close before the wedding, so she'd asked her parents to drive up for Thanksgiving. My mother said yes before the sentence was even finished, and then the house became a production. New china borrowed from a friend. Flower beds re-edged in November, when nothing was blooming and no one would see them under coats. A tasting menu, for Thanksgiving, a holiday whose menu was invented before any of us were born. I stood in her kitchen one Saturday while she laid out 3 napkin folds like surgical instruments, And that's when she said the sentence that would follow us for the rest of this story. We need this table to look right. She didn't even look up. 3 days later, my father called. He never called. He cleared his throat twice, and I heard the rustle of notes. Your mother and I have been talking about Thursday. We think maybe this year isn't your year. He walked me through it in the same calm voice he'd used denying claims for 30 years. The Fosters were established people. There'd be questions. What do you do? Questions. A warehouse, how do we dress that up? This was Andrew's moment. Surely I understood. Then quieter, like it explained everything. Your mother needs this table to look right. I asked him one question. Did Andrew ask for this or did Mom? The silence went on long enough that I heard their refrigerator humming in the background. That silence was the whole answer, and we both knew it. I hung up holding a mixing bowl I no longer had a reason to fill. And then the phone rang again. It was my office. Rebecca, my operations chief of 10 years, doesn't call after hours unless something is worth it. You sitting down or wallowing? She said. Both, I said. A logistics broker out of Cincinnati had reached out. A request for proposal sent blind. Client name withheld. Code name Project Harvest. A family-owned specialty foods company preparing a major regional expansion, looking for a cold chain partner for the whole program. If we won it, it would be the biggest contract in company history. And one line in their requirements made me laugh out loud for the first time in days. They wanted a partner with, quote, real family-run values. Family-run values. I'd just been erased from a family dinner over a seating chart. And here was some company across the state willing to pay real money for the exact thing my own family couldn't see standing 3 feet in front of them. I told Rebecca we were going after it with everything we had. We had 3 weeks. I pulled 5 years of clean safety records. I drove the Columbus to Cincinnati corridor myself at 4 in the morning, timing every mile, because a route plan written by someone who's never sat in the seat is just fiction with a logo on it. In the pitch, behind a frosted glass wall, I could see shapes, the client watching unseen before they'd ever meet me. I closed the way I always close. Big firms will sell you software. I'll give you the name of the driver who knocks on your dock door at 2 in the morning, and I'll answer the phone myself if anything goes wrong. 2 days later, the broker called. Unanimous. They'd chosen us. The identity of the client, strangely, would stay sealed until the signing. Big families like their privacy, the broker said. I didn't think much of it, until one line came back from their debrief, a line I wrote on a sticky note and kept on my monitor for a month. The founder showed up herself. The big firm sent slide decks. I had no idea, standing in my warehouse with pizza grease on my sleeve, and my whole crew grinning like we'd won something bigger than a contract, that the signing was scheduled for the week of Thanksgiving. The Saturday before the holiday, Andrew showed up at my house for the first time in months. He didn't want coffee. He wanted to go over a couple things, in case it came up with the Fosters, what I should say about my job. Vague was good. Actually, on second thought, maybe don't mention work at all. I told him I wouldn't lie about my life, but he didn't need to worry. I wouldn't be there to embarrass anyone. He had the decency to wince. He did not have the decency to argue. On the Monday of that week, I drove out anyway with the rolls I'd made from my grandmother's recipe, because being uninvited from the table didn't mean she had to be. My mother took the tin at the door. Behind her, through the gap, I could see the dining room staged like a magazine shoot, and on the sideboard a handwritten seating chart. I have good eyes. 15 years of reading manifests at dawn will do that to you. There were 6 names on that chart. Mine wasn't one of them, and the chair where I had sat every Thanksgiving of my adult life had a new name inked in my mother's careful handwriting. George F. She saw me see it. To her credit, she didn't pretend otherwise. Don't be dramatic, sweetheart, she said, adjusting her glasses like it was a scheduling matter. It's one dinner. We need this table to look right. I said, enjoy the rolls, and walked back to my car. The next morning, our attorney sent over the signed contract for the Project Harvest deal. I flipped to the last page the way I always do, read the names before the numbers, and there it was in navy ink above a line of type I had to read 3 times before my eyes agreed to it. Foster Family Foods, LLC. George Foster, President. The room went very quiet, or I did. In 2 days, the Fosters were going to sit down at my parents' table, in front of a seating chart with my name traded out for theirs. And not one person at that table would have any idea whose name was already on the contract that would define their daughter's future in-law's business for the next decade. I picked up the phone to call our lawyer. Not to panic, just to ask one question. Was there a conflict? There wasn't. My lawyer walked the fence line of it and came back clean. A client's daughter marrying my brother was a relationship, not a conflict. No money crossed, no ownership crossed, nothing crossed but a wedding aisle. I put it in writing to her and Rebecca that same hour, so the record would show I'd flagged it myself the day I knew. That night I sat with my phone in my hand and Andrew's name on the screen, and twice I almost called him. Your future father-in-law just signed the biggest deal in my company's history. What happens if I tell you that tonight? It becomes a grenade I rolled under their table. My mother spins it by morning. Claire's trying to make the wedding about herself. And there was something else, something cleaner than fear. My family had given me an instruction in writing through my brother. Don't mention work at all. My client wanted privacy. My mother wanted silence. For once in my life, those 2 things pointed the same direction. So I made myself one rule and I kept it. I would not fire the first shot. I would not hint or call or arrange a reveal. But if anyone, client, parent, or God herself, asked me a direct question, I was done lying about my life. Thanksgiving Eve, my mother called, sugar in her voice from the first syllable, which with her is a weather warning. If the Fosters happened to ask about me, they probably wouldn't. We'd just say I was traveling for work. Simpler that way. I looked out my kitchen window at the dark and thought about how I'd built a company specifically so other people could do the traveling. I spent Thanksgiving on the dock with my night crew, working the holiday shifts so families with turkeys could stay home. Late that evening, 2 things happened 25 miles apart. My mother lit her good candles in the good china light, and the first trailer marked Foster Family Foods backed into my dock, staging product for Friday's launch, right on schedule. I wasn't at that table, so what I know of it came from Nora, who called me that night from her car and talked for almost an hour, her memory sharper than any security camera. The Fosters arrived at 2 on time, with a case of preserves and handwritten labels. There was a tour of the house, a story about the crown molding. Dinner went exactly to script, until the rolls came around, my grandmother's recipe, and George Foster took one bite and stopped chewing. These are diner rolls, he said. Scalded milk dough. Who taught you, son? Because Andrew, of course, had been presented as the baker. Nora says he turned the color of the cranberry sauce and mumbled something about a family recipe. It was Helen who asked the question my mother had rehearsed for. And Claire, Andrew's sister? We'd hoped to meet her. Traveling, my mother said smoothly. Work. You know how it is this time of year. Dinner stayed perfect for another 50 minutes. It was my father who lit the fuse, wanting to bond, asking George how business was going. George's whole face changed, Nora said. The polite mask came off. Big year, he told the table. 18 months of planning, and the last piece had finally clicked that Tuesday. We just signed with a remarkable founder. Best decision we made all year. Helen picked it up like they'd rehearsed it. A woman who built her company from one used truck. Self-made. I shook her hand once, George said. Working hands. You can tell everything from a handshake. Andrew, leaning in with his advisor voice, asked the name of the firm. Professional Curiosity. George said the name of my company. And my mother, holding the gravy boat over the good tablecloth, said, What a coincidence. Our Claire's in shipping too. Nora says the room did something rooms don't usually do. It stopped. Helen set down her fork. You could see the arithmetic behind her eyes. A founder out of Columbus, a logistics company, working hands, and a last name that had been sitting at this table since 2 o'clock. She turned to my mother, perfectly polite, and asked, "Are you related to Claire Dawson?" My father was at the sideboard with the wine. Nora watched him turn around slowly, like a man deciding whether he could just stay facing the wall for the rest of his life. "Our daughter is named Claire," my mother managed. Then George laughed, big, delighted, hands flat on the table. "Your daughter is Claire Dawson? We signed with her Tuesday. She's the founder. The one I've been talking about all night." He looked around, waiting for the pride to land. "You must be so proud." Nora says the word proud landed on that table like a dropped glass. Nobody moved to pick it up. My mother reached for the only tool she's ever trusted, revision. "Claire's very private," she said. "Keeps to herself." And that might have held, except Helen has a memory like a signed ledger. "How funny," she said. "At the engagement party, I could have sworn you told me your daughter was between things." Nora, God bless her, chose that moment to be honest. "You did say that. I remember because Claire told me about her company that same night. I thought I'd misheard one of you. 2 sentences. That's all the truth ever needs." Andrew tried to save it. Chuckled, said something about how Claire's world and theirs don't really overlap, so they kept things simple for family events. Her world. 100 miles of refrigerated freight, his future father-in-law's whole expansion was now riding on. George went still in a way that made the table colder than the draft off the window. He looked at my brother and said quietly, "Son, a family building something honest is never just business." Then Helen set her napkin down with the calm of a surgeon closing, and asked the question no one at that table could survive. "Forgive me. I want to be sure I understand. Was she traveling, or was she not invited?" The Fosters left 40 minutes later, courteous to the last button. I heard all of this sitting on a loading dock with a paper plate of turkey, my phone lighting up over and over in my back pocket, 25 miles from a table I'd never wanted to sit at that badly in the first place. Until, hearing it, I realized some small stubborn part of me had. My father called the next morning. He didn't say I'm sorry. He said, "Last night got away from everyone." He didn't say we were wrong. He said, "Your mother's very upset." And then he arrived at the real reason for the call. We should clear the air before things get complicated with the Fosters. There's a wedding to think about. Not a father calling a daughter. A man calling a vendor whose goodwill his family suddenly needed. My mother sent a text instead. "You could have told us who your client was. You let us walk in blind. You embarrassed us. I hope you're happy." I'd been uninvited from Thanksgiving for being an embarrassment, and by Friday I was guilty of embarrassing them by quietly working 25 miles away, exactly as instructed. I didn't answer either of them. I had nothing left in the drawer where the explanations used to live. The invitation came the first week of December. Heavy cream paper, a wax seal, my name and fountain pen. The Foster Family Foods Winter Partners reception, at the old barn on their original orchard property, 75 years of the company, and the formal announcement of the expansion. 80 guests, buyers, press, longtime employees. And because the families were about to be joined by marriage, my parents too. Under the printed text, in Helen's handwriting, "We would be honored to introduce our partners to the woman making this possible." Rebecca stood in my doorway while I read it. "You know they'll all be there." "I know. And you're going." "As the founder," I said. "Nothing else." For days before the party, my mother came to my office for the first time in 12 years, carrying a casserole she didn't need to bring. I watched through the glass as she crossed the lobby, past the safety awards, past the dispatch board with 40 routes running, and something in her face recalculated as she walked. She led with warmth, which is how I knew to check the exits. Then came the ask, smooth as the gravy boat. If anyone brought up Thanksgiving at the reception, we'd call it a mix-up with the invitations. One family, one story. For Andrew's sake. Then, phone already out. Could we get a photo together? In front of the trucks? 12 years she'd never once come near my work, And now she wanted the backdrop. I won't perform, Mom, I said. If nobody asks, I'll say nothing, same as always. But if someone asks me directly, I'll tell the truth. Calmly. That's the only deal on the table. She stood, smoothed her coat, and told the window, not me. After everything I've done for this family. She never finishes that sentence. She never has to. Saturday, I wore my grandmother's thin gold bracelet on my right wrist, the working hand, and drove the hour and 45 minutes to the barn myself. It was beautiful. Beams the color of strong tea, string lights, a wall of preserve jars arranged by decade, and by the door, a photograph of George's grandfather selling jam off a cart, sleeves rolled, hands like my driver's hands. I understood the whole family in one frame. George found me before I'd finished my cider. There she is, he said, loud enough to turn heads, and spent 40 minutes walking me from buyer to buyer as the founder I told you about. A woman on their bottling line asked after one of my drivers by name. Then the Dawsons arrived. My mother stopped at the door, physically stopped, at the sight of me standing between George and his biggest buyer. Andrew found something fascinating about the jar wall. My father stood a long moment in front of that photograph by the entrance, the cart, the rolled sleeves, with an expression I still think about. George tapped his glass. 75 years, he said. Then the announcement. 400 new stores across 6 states by summer. And none of it moves an inch without Claire Dawson and her company. Claire, say a word. I don't love microphones. I said what was true and kept it small. Companies don't move food. People do. 58 drivers are going to carry your jars through 6 states of weather. Remember their names, not mine. My grandmother ran a diner for 30 years. She used to say, feed people right and you'll never be small. You've been feeding people right for 75 years. We're honored to help. The applause was warm and long. And then, rising over it, came my mother's voice, pitched for the room. That's our daughter. We always believed in her. Andrew appeared at her side, nodding on cue. My father trailed behind them. Helen, who had missed nothing since October, set down her glass and smiled the way gracious women smile right before surgery. We're just so glad to finally have Claire at a table, she said warmly to the whole circle. We did miss her at Thanksgiving. Where was it you were traveling, dear? I felt my mother's eyes on the side of my face like sun through glass. All I had to do was name an airport. I wasn't traveling, I said, level and unhurried. I wasn't invited. No thunder. The truth doesn't boom. It lands soft, like the first snow that cancels everything. There was a concern, I added, that my job would be hard to dress up. George turned his head slowly toward my father. My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do. Cracked right there under the lights. How can you say that? One dinner. We were protecting your brother. You've always been so sensitive. And then the pivot tears arriving on schedule. She let us walk in blind. She sandbagged this family. I didn't raise my voice. Your table looked right, Mom, I said. It just wasn't true. What happened next happened without me. The buyer beside her took a small step back, the kind of distance people put between themselves and a stove they've just learned is hot. Nora crossed the circle in front of 80 people and stood at my side, her hand on my arm, facing her own future in-laws. Choosing. George put his glass down. In this family, he said, not loudly, we were taught the person who loads the truck outranks the person who watches them load it. Helen turned to my mother gently, which somehow made it worse. You must be very proud of her, she said. It's a shame you needed us to tell you why. Then the party simply resumed around my parents, the way traffic flows around a stall. My father took my mother's elbow and steered her out to the porch, and through the window I watched something I'd never seen in 34 years. My father talking and my mother listening. He stopped me at the coat rack on my way out, holding my coat the way he used to hold my backpack when I was 6. You've made your point, Claire, he said quietly. In front of everyone. Come to Christmas. We'll fix this. Even then, made your point, fix this, as if the problem was that people had seen it, not that it was true. You called it a warehouse for 12 years, Dad, I said, taking my coat. The Fosters call it a partner. I'm not angry anymore. But I'm done auditioning for a seat at a table I outgrew a long time ago. When you want to know me, not manage me, not photograph me, my door is open. It's the one with my name on it. You've never walked through it. I drove home with the radio off, and this time nobody cried. The contract ran flawless through the new year. The wedding moved to fall, Nora's doing. She told Andrew there were things she needed to see from him first, starting with a Tuesday counselor. In February he texted me, no excuses in it, which for him is practically a personality transplant. He was starting to understand what it cost me, all those quiet dinners, and he was ashamed he'd known about the phone call before our father made it. My mother tells her own version around town. A misunderstanding, Claire's always been dramatic. But 80 witnesses is 80 witnesses, and her version keeps arriving places second. My father came to the warehouse alone one gray afternoon in January, no appointment. I found him at the window watching two drivers back trailers in through the sleet. Your grandmother would have liked this place, he said. Not an apology, but the first true thing he'd said to me in years. I gave him the tour. He asked what the temperature sensors did. He shook my driver Thomas's hand and held it a second too long, looking down, and I watched him finally understand something at 64, standing in a cold warehouse, far too late and somehow still in time. This Thanksgiving we set a long table between the racks in warehouse 2, my drivers, their kids Rebecca and Nora. Every chair had a name on it. Every name got a follow-up question. Here's what I know now. The people who need you to shrink so their picture looks right were never proud of you. They were afraid of what you'd become without their permission. And the moment you stop auditioning for a seat at their table, you find out the world already saved you one.